For this miniature, you'll notice I started off with a white undercoat, and the reason for this is a lot of the colours on the miniature are going to be quite light, so it helps to reduce the number of coats you need to put for the lighter areas of the miniature. And I started off with fenrisian grey for the main armour, and the reason for this is I want to create a bit of a contrast between this miniature and the chariot that he's going to ride. So I chose to make this slightly lighter, and then the chariot will be slightly darker, just to help to separate the visual look of the two parts. Mechanicus standard grey was used for the recessed areas for the armour, and it was thinned down with some water just to help it to flow into the recesses nice and easy. For the highlighted areas, first off I started off with wulfen grey, and this is covering pretty much the entirety of any area where I want those highlights. And next I'm using white scar, and the white scar just wants to be more the tips of the areas for the highlights, just to add that little bit of extra brightness. For the metallic areas, all but the wolf symbol on the top and the bottom of the axe, I started off with lead belcher, then I used iron breaker, and lastly I used rune fang. Now for the wolf symbol on the top and the bottom of the axe, I used these colours and then I stopped that process. But for the other areas where I've got the metallics, I then used null oil over the areas to give them a duller metallic look. But for the wolf symbols on the axe, when they were painted later on, I didn't put the null oil on because I wanted to make them look like it was a silver rather than a dirty metal, so I wanted a nice shiny silver look to them. But for the rest of it, I wanted to try and tone it down because it's a very bright miniature in the first place, so I want to try and make some of it look darker. For the cloak, I'm not going to cover in this video the side of the cloak which has got the wolf skin on it, because I'm going to do something for a separate video for that. But for this part of the cloak, I started off with a couple of coats of corn red to make sure you've got a good base coat. Afterwards I did a 50-50 mix of the corn red and Bugman glow for the highlights. Then I did Bugman glow by itself, and lastly I ended up using 2 coats of carabao crimson. And the reason why is, again, I'm trying to find some areas where I can tone it down and make it a little bit darker, so that's why I put 2 coats on, just to make sure it's as dark as I can get it. Abaddon black has been applied onto the shoulder pad on this side, and also it's been applied onto the chest plate. For the gold areas, first off I used Balthazar gold, and that takes a couple of coats. Next, Gehenna's gold was used, Auric armour gold. But for some of the areas, especially the areas where the gold is right next to the grey areas of the armour, what I've tried to do with the Auric gold is to apply the gold on the top, and therefore there's a slightly darker gold colour between the light gold and the armour itself. So it gives a slight difference in colour of the gold. Because it's a darker gold, it helps to create a separation between two otherwise very light colours. You can see from this part of the video that for the cables, I've done the cables in different colours. Again, it's a good way to try and add a little bit of extra colour and detail to the miniature. And once all the colours have had time to dry, I've used a small amount of null oil in between the individual cables just to help to create a separation between the different colours. For the skin, because I want to give this impression that they're living on a very cold planet, I started off with Keslev flesh first. I then applied Upshapti bone, and lastly on the very utmost edges I use a very small amount of screaming skull, and I think this way it gives it a colour of look which reflects that there's very little in the way of the tanning of the skin and a very pale pigmentation. Unfortunately, the quality of the video didn't come out very well when it came to painting the hair, but I started off with corn red first. Afterwards I used 50-50 mix of corn red and Uriel yellow. Then on a few areas, just to pick it out, I used pure Uriel yellow. Afterwards I used Agrax Earth Shade over all of the hair, and this helps to not only create some depth, but it also helps to mute down the brightness of some of the areas of the hair where it was Uriel yellow. To finish it off, for the stone parts on the leg plate and the shoulder plate, and also there's a few little runic pieces which you could paint them as a bone colour if you wanted, but I chose to stick to a stone colour because it's going to look therefore darker with it being a grey as opposed to a bone colour. And I started off with Mechanica Standard Grey, then I had a 50-50 mix with the Mechanica Standard Grey and Ulthuan Grey, and lastly I applied a few little highlights of the Ulthuan Grey just to pick out the uppermost areas. And lastly, remember to look at the finished miniature in the description. If you like the video, remember to subscribe, click the notification bell, and also share the video with your friends.